Hi everybody, it's Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the Shimmerz Paints Color Kitz collection from March. I'm starting off this layout using a stencil, and I'm sorry I don't know where I got this stencil, but it's a series of kind of irregular lines, and I'm using some Crafters Workshop modeling paste and I'm putting it through the stencil. The paper that I'm using is a smooth white cardstock. It's 120 pounds, and I have already coated it with some white gesso. Sometimes I will add the color to the background and then put modeling paste through a stencil on top of the color, and other times I'll start off with the modeling paste. I have to say I usually start off with the color, but for this layout, I was just in the mood to start off with the modeling paste, so that's what I did. There's a slightly different look when you put the color down first and layer the modeling paste on top than when you start off with the modeling paste. And it's very hard for me to explain exactly the difference because it comes a little bit different every time. But I guess it's a little bit of a cleaner look perhaps when you put the color down first. But I wanted to kind of experiment with color today. So this is what I decided to do. I used my palette knife to make the edges look a little bit less regular, a little bit more jagged. And then once the modeling paste dried, and I can't stress enough how important it is to let the modeling paste dry because sometimes I get impatient and I don't, and it kind of just smears the modeling paste. So you definitely want to make sure that you have either let it air dry or dried it with a heat tool. So now I'm starting off with one of the colors from the March kit. This is a color splash called Rockin. I love this beautiful blue color, and I'm spreading it all around the area where I have the modeling paste. And you can see that I get a little messy and it goes outside of that area, but that's okay with me. I don't mind if it's not applied perfectly. And before I added the color, I started off with a few sprays of water, and then I continued adding water here and there just to allow the paint to move around a little bit on the modeling paste. It's funny, years ago, one of the comments that I got on one of my videos was, when do you dry your background? So since I got that comment, I always include just a few seconds of me using my heat tool just to let you know when I dry it. And I understand those kinds of questions because I frequently watch tutorials on YouTube, and when you're doing something for the first time, all the instruction, support, and direction that you can get, even if it's something like when do you dry the background, can be so important to success. So I always try to include that now ever since I was asked. I don't know if anyone else is interested in that, but that's just a standard part of my videos now, just in case. So in addition to the Rockin', I'm also using an Inklingz called Blue Lagoon. The great thing is that while there are a lot of different types of Shimmerz paints, they all work together really well. The color splash that I started out with, that's more of an acrylic paint. And then the Inklingz is more of a shimmery watercolor paint. And now I want to add a few hints of purple to the background. So I'm using a Creameez called Purple Peony, and that was also one of the paints that came in the March kit. And I don't want the background to be purple, I want it to be blue, but with a couple of touches of purple. So I'm using a piece of plastic like I love doing, and I'm adding some color to it and then squishing it down just in a couple of places. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to add another color to the background, but I ended up being really happy with this addition of purple. I think that it just kind of made the background a lot more interesting. And it's a really nice color combination, the blue with the purple. So earlier I watered down a little bit of the Blue Lagoon and I added some splatters to the background. And now I'm going to do the same thing with the Purple Peony. For both the Inklingz and the Creameez, you have to spray a little bit of water on them to start activating them. And then if you want to add splatters, I feel like you have to add a little bit of extra water in order to get those splatters to splatter around. If the paint is too thick, it's a little bit difficult to splatter. You can see here that I'm adding even more of those blue splatters. And I feel like you can't really see on the video what the splatters add to the background, but I just think that they add a really cool effect, and I add them quite a bit. So I decided I might as well go in with some splatters of the Color Splash. So the Rockin' Robin was another color that I splattered over the background. And those Color Splash sprays, I love using those on my gel plate. If you're into gel printing, they're definitely a really great paint to make some cool effects with. And here I'm using the packaging once again with a little bit of the Rockin' Robin and adding it to the background, although I think I kind of overdid it, so I removed some of it. So this is where I made a mistake. I'm showing you the film that I used to protect my background when I ran it through the laminator. I will use my laminator to flatten things out, but I did not allow the paint to dry thoroughly. So total user error on that one. And what happened was it pulled some of the paint off of the background. Even though at first I was absolutely horrified, I think it turned out to not be a terrible thing. I was able to use some paints and cover up some of the areas, but then I left a couple of the areas the way they were with those white spots, and I really kind of like that addition to the background. So it very rarely happens, I feel like, but this was truly a happy accident where it definitely didn't seem to be working out very well, and then I decided that I really liked the effect that the removal of some of the paint created. I'm almost done with the background, but not quite. I wanted to add some watered down white acrylic paint splatters, and I'm going to add a few more splatters in a moment. But first I'm going to work on my photo. So I had this photo of my family, and it was a square photo, but I kind of liked the way it looked when I held it as a diamond. It actually looks a little bit straighter looking, and I don't usually have photos positioned like this, so I thought it'd be something a little bit different. And then I cut out 2 L shapes of pattern paper, and I just kind of fit them together. I put one on the top and one on the bottom, and I thought that that added a little bit of color behind the photo, and I think that ends up looking nice on the background because the background is blues and purples, and then the matting is yellows and pinks, and I like that combination. And then I wanted to add just a couple of watered down black acrylic paint splatters because I know there are a lot of touches of black on the embellishments, and so I thought that that would help to tie the background in with the rest of the elements on the layout. So as I said, I knew there were going to be some touches of black throughout the layout. You could see the flowers that are on the right hand side of my mat. I fussy cut all of those out, and I left a little bit of a black border around the outside. So I always like to use the darkest color somewhere near the photo, usually to mat it, so that the photo will stand out as much as, if not more than, the other elements on the page. So I added a black mat behind my photo. And then I decided I was going to use this sentiment, Good Vibes, as the title. And I also added a black mat to that. And here you could see that I'm not adding a thick mat. It's a very thin mat of black. I love the way it makes the embellishment look more bold. It's just a really nice combination to me to have bright colors along with black. So I'm adding my title to the right-hand side. It says Good Vibes. And then I also include another embellishment before it. I love it's like a shooting star. I think that fits really nicely together with the title. And then as I had mentioned, I fussy cut out a whole bunch of flowers from one of the pattern papers. And I'm just going to sprinkle those on the background. I'm a huge fan of fussy cutting images from pattern paper. In this case, I love the way there are so many flowers and there are so many different colors. And I really love the way you can repeat images when you fussy cut them out from a pattern paper, because usually you get a lot of the same or similar images when you do that. And I just really love that. So I like the idea of using all these flowers and sprinkling them in the background. And then there were 3 flowers in the ephemera pack that were kind of like a rainbow or like an ombre look. So I decided that I was going to use those 3 flowers, and I spread them around on the background. I have one in the top cluster, and then I have one on the lower right hand side, and then one on the left hand side of the photo. And then I decided that I was going to do the same thing with some butterflies. I picked out 3 butterflies and I spread those all around the layout, again creating that triangle, that visual triangle that we like to create balance on our layouts. Oh, there was another pattern paper that had smaller flowers, and that pattern paper had a white background, so I cut out a little white border going all around the little flowers, and I decided I was going to just kind of sprinkle those in with the other flowers. And again, I like a variety of sizes, so I like the way there were two different size flowers. I just think that it added a lot to the background to include those smaller flowers. And then I wanted to add a little bit of dimension to the butterfly, so I put a little bit of fun foam on the back of their wings. And I don't have a lot of dimension on this page, but I always feel like compelled to add some fun foam to the back of butterfly wings to make the butterflies look like they're flying. I just seem to automatically add that on my layouts. So I was thinking that the layout is basically done, and then this is the stage where I'm going to add a couple of embellishments or jewels just to add a little bit of a different texture to the layout. So for these larger flowers, I was thinking that I would just use some white enamel dots that I had in my stash. And then I was also thinking that the smaller ones might look nice on the smaller flowers. However, I'm going to remove all of those smaller enamel dots from the small flowers because I felt like it was too much of the same thing, too many white enamel dots. I wanted to add a different center to those ephemera flowers, the ones that are multicolored. So I decided that I would use these embellishments that I have in my stash from Want to Scrap. They're pink. They're called dewdrops. So they are transparent, but they have a pink tint to them. So I added those to those three flowers. Then I removed those smaller enamel dots. I'll definitely use those again. And I replaced them with the same product, those dewdrops, but this time I used some clear ones, and I used the smaller size so that they would be the right scale for those little tiny flowers. And I like the way those were, again, something different from the enamel dots, so it didn't look like too much repetition of the same embellishment. And then I realized that I had just a couple of those smaller clear dewdrops left. So I thought that they would look nice in the centers of the butterflies. They have a nice sheen to them, which goes along really well with the sheen in the Shimmerz paints. And I got lucky. I had just enough of those little tiny dewdrops to add two to each of the butterflies. And then the last thing that I did was I moved a little tiny flower around until I found a home for it. I had placed it in a couple of different spots, and I finally decided that it would look best underneath the title. And that is the very last touch, and the layout is complete. Don't forget, when you place an order with Shimmerz Paints, use my name to get a free gift, and don't forget to check out the Shimmerz shop. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.